Cinema Worms.
Discussing everything from Grima Wormtongue to the Shy Halib.
I'm Sabib.
And I'm Linz.
And this is Cinema Worms Podcast. Pierce Brosnan was contractually forbidden from wearing a full tuxedo in any non-James Bond film from 1995 to 2002. So we're going to be discussing Drop, which is a thriller horror directed by Christopher Landon, who directed Happy Death Day, and it's coming from Blumhouse Productions, who does other horror thriller sort of movies. And in this film, we're following 30-something Violet. She's a single mother. She's widowed, but we don't know how her husband died. And she's about to go on a date with a guy she's been chatting with for 3 months or so. But she's really nervous. It seems like she hasn't been dating for quite a while. In the first scenes of the movie, we're revealed that she's experienced like a massive trauma with her ex, and we don't know how that all played out, but it's sort of relating to her current like PTSD and nervousness about going on the date. So she shows up on this date at the top of this massive building in a mysterious city, and she meets Henry, played by the way, Violet's played by Megan Fahey of White Lotus fame. And
she was great in White Lotus.
Yeah, she was great.
Really excellent.
Right, yeah. And it's a slightly different character, more earnest. But Henry is, cat, played by, Henry
you,
is
son.
the somehow most perfect man in the world. Or is he? Played by Brandon Skelnar, who you've been seeing all over the place now. They're beginning to chat, hit it off, and then she starts getting these quote-unquote digi-drops, which are basically airdrops from a stranger. At first, they just seem like odd memes that are poking at her. Then they become threatening. Then you realize someone is blackmailing her. She can't tell anyone, call the police, tell her date. They want her to do a series of escalating things, the worst of which is kill her date. And they have her...
Spoiler.
It's in the trailer.
Okay. I'll... Granted.
Are we still recording?
Yes.
We will keep this in. We should do it.
Okay.
Shit. Spoiler! But it's in the trailer, so they spoiled it. Her son is being babysat by her younger sister. They are not aware that there's someone, like a mass intruder in the house, who's basically like taunting her through her own security cameras. So then if she doesn't do what they say, boom, her son is dead. So the movie unfolds as we sort of follow her cat and mouse sort of interactions with this mysterious, threatening force.
So a shout out to memes being used as a horror technique in this, which I enjoyed. I was enjoying every time, because every time a meme came up, I was sort of like, oh yeah, I recognize this one. I recognize that one. They must have had a lot of fun making these memes.
Reddit.
I mean, obviously, shout out to Reddit forever. So I thought this was a pretty fun time. It was obviously the worst first date of ever. Again, I clocked the culprit very early on because my brain is a nightmare machine that cannot stand to not solve a puzzle immediately.
You must know.
It is... Oh, I wish I could turn that off. It is so frustrating sometimes. And I'm generally usually right, which is nice. So what I found interesting about this was the way that everything kept escalating. The date, Henry actually tries to help her. He notices that she's getting these drops on her phone to begin before they turn, very sinister. And he tries to reassure her that it's just maybe like someone playing a prank on her or whatever. And he actually at one point wanders around the restaurant with like calibrating, because he says the drops can only be made within 50 feet. So he figures out that it has to be somebody who's sitting in the restaurant with them and not necessarily someone who's like, not on that floor or in the kitchen or the lobby or something. So she knows that someone in the room with her is doing this to her. And the more that Violet progresses, it's a bit of a sunk cost fallacy, really. The moment she starts to comply, is basically the beginning of the end for her, because she cannot then start pulling out. No matter how things escalate, she has to keep going because there is this threat that, you know, this guy is going to harm her son. And we see this really nicely mirrored in the parallel with the flashbacks that we get for her abusive relationship as well. That she, you know, it was difficult for her to leave that. It was difficult for her to fight back. You can see there's an amount of like placating and kind of, you know, the traditional responses to like abuse are like fight, flight, fawn and freeze. And you can see that she exhibits more of the kind of fawn and freeze end of that spectrum. And so even though she's done a lot of work on herself and she now counsels other women who've been, you know, survivors, she's still sometimes right back there in that mindset. And I thought that was a really interesting emotional core for this character. I think without something like that, this would have been a very silly film that you didn't necessarily care about. But given the emotional core of that character, given Megan Fahey's like ability to pull that off, I enjoyed it. It was a fun time. Even though there were silly moments, it was also quite funny. There were comedic moments as well. And shout out to the hottest bartender in the world, a legit model.
Yeah.
I don't know why she's working at this restaurant when she should be on the catwalk, but you know, fair play to her. We all enjoyed seeing her.
Yes, the character of Violet has this friendly banter, which, you know, could have been flirtation in another film.
I'm just saying, I was kind of shipping her with the bartender. I was kind of, I can't spoil or anything, but I was kind of hoping that if the film went a certain way, that she would end up with a bartender.
Yeah, so I agree. They make memes very terrifying. But yeah, the emotional core. Okay, so this film is like purposefully like super dramatic, sometimes stylized, like bam, 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 horror, thriller. And it embraces that identity.
Yeah.
But it does have this like tense, earnest, like really emotional core with her trauma and then her connecting to Henry, who's like deeply empathetic and then has his own like mysterious emotional issues going on. So it creates like it this is where like writing is good, where you see the core emotional conflict matching up with the more tangible external conflict of what's threatening her. Like it makes sense emotionally. For me, the final, so also the tension ratcheting up constantly.
You were never given a break in this film. So if you go and see this, you really need to know that Drop is not a film that you can put your feet up and relax. Although there were some little jerks in front of us who had their feet on the seats and I wanted to throw things at their heads. But it is not the kind of film that is cozy. You will feel quite stressed at some points during it, which is good. A film should elicit that reaction in you.
Yeah. As you said, I was quote unquote flailing around.
There was a certain point towards the end you were flailing and flapping like a wounded bird, and I was worried that you were going to launch right out of your seat at one point and out of the window, much like there is in the trailer. As we all know, if you break a window on a high rise, it creates a vortex much like that of an airplane, and we all get sucked out. So that's what happens.
Logical. Final point: the final act didn't quite, I don't think, work for either of us. It's not that it doesn't work. It doesn't do what everything else in the film was doing. It's just
I don't agree
for me. But how about you?
I don't agree with that. I mean, I agree that it didn't work for me exactly, but I think for a different reason. I wanted more of what had been set up already to come to fruition, and I felt that it didn't. There were some really nice things being set up that just were never touched on again, but that made me wonder, was that an original choice of the writer, or was that potentially like a studio note where they were like, okay, we want to trim the fat, you know, we want to just keep this very tight. I feel like given some of the things that are mentioned when she is trying to figure out who in the restaurant it could be, and several culprits immediately kind of stand out as being potential suspects, there are things that are not paid off later. But it would have been wonderful, and I think it would have elevated this film even more. It might have been then a film that I would have highly recommended, maybe see multiple times, versus something that I had fun. I don't think that I would necessarily like watch it again. If it was on, I wouldn't change the channel. But
yes.
I've seen it now, and I'm happy enough about that. I'm going to be talking about Restless, which I saw quite recently and really enjoyed, if enjoyed is the right word. for feeling like my heart was going to explode out of my chest at several points.
Mm.
Written and directed by Jed Hart, who also did several shorts, including Candy Floss, which starred Barry Keoghan. And this is Hart's first feature-length project. And it stars Lindsay Marshall as Nikki. You might remember Marshall from Being Human, or Rome. If you ever saw Rome, she played Cleopatra. In Restless, Marshall plays a sympathetic hospice worker driven to the absolute brink of madness by her new noisy neighbours, who have moved next door into the house that her own parents once lived in, which adds an extra kind of emotional layer to this. And the film also stars Austin Macaulay as the coked up asshole neighbour. You might have seen Macaulay in several episodes of the TV show Behind Her Eyes, or he's actually had small parts in Rocket Man and The Personal History of David Copperfield as well. This was a really tense experience. Having had friends who have had their own problems with neighbours, and we've had problems with noisy neighbours as well, it was just so stressful to watch. It starts pretty quickly with her, kind of politely asking them to turn the noise down. And they do briefly, but then it's back. And of course, Nikki, she tries her best to kind of deal with it. She plays gentle little whale noises and sort of mindfulness things to herself at night. She gets new headphones and tries to kind of block out the 4 a.m. rave that's happening next door, and then is followed by a very noisy sex session from her new neighbours, which is obviously also...
The energy, wow.
I know, and the guy doesn't appear to have a job. He appears to be between jobs. One might wonder why that is. So she tries to get control of the situation in a number of ways. And as I mentioned, she does try and ask them, at first politely and then less politely, to turn it down. And then she tries to get her own back in a number of ways. And I don't want to spoiler any of them here, but they start quite small and then they begin to escalate quite rapidly. She is having a mental breakdown over the course of the several days that this film takes place. And understandably so. We don't necessarily agree with everything she's doing, but we can see exactly why she's doing it. She is just trying to live. These people have moved into the house that her parents were once in. When her son calls from university, we get a little bit more of a clue about what's going on there. And she does have this guy who's kind of interested in her. And at one point she goes round to his house after having a very awkward date with him, just in order to get like a bed for the night, just to sleep. He's also pretty funny as well. So it is a comedy, but it is an incredibly tense one.
So yeah, I haven't seen this film yet. I was out of the city.
You were gallivanting on a writing retreat.
Yeah.
I'm not jealous at all. And I saw this at a preview, so you may still see it. I don't know if it'll be out, where it'll be out exactly, but I was lucky to see it at a preview, and I'm really glad that I did.
It sounds like it's sort of, would you say it's in the vein of some of these like indie UK sort of features that we've been seeing? Like they all seem to carry that sort of like dark, gritty vibe.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's right. I mean, and the color palette kind of represents that as well. You do kind of like, everything is quite muddy looking. It does start off feeling quite sunny, and then as her breakdown increases, like everything in her house starts to feel darker and darker. And she's quite an isolated character. Like, as I said, she has this one guy who's kind of interested in her, but her son's away at university, her parents are dead. I don't know what's happened to her ex. She obviously doesn't speak to him anymore. And she doesn't really seem to have friends. She has a sister, but she's not able to get the sister on the phone for a lot of this film. So she's incredibly isolated, and in that she is spiraling. There's nobody there to pull her out of this.
Yeah.
And it does feel, it's very much this kind of like, this one character in this one location having an absolute breakdown. It kind of reminds me in a little bit of a way of Calm with Horses.
I was just recommending that to someone.
But not completely. But just something in like the fact that the violence, emotional and physical, does start to escalate in this film. It's this nice, really tight, really tense one location kind of drama.
Yeah, it sounds like it's that the tension is maintained because it's such a contained story. And very much focused in on this one character. And I mean, we were talking before about Sister Midnight. I'm not saying that they're at all the same, but this idea of like being with this like singular character
Mm-hmm.
as they're just furious against the world. I mean, this is a very like realistic, grounded
Yeah.
version of that,
Mm-hmm.
and a very like particular moment in time. It seems like where
Mm-hmm.
she's experienced loss, she's alone, she can't cope.
Yeah.
Sounds like.
Yeah. And I think it's really interesting because I saw this the day before I also saw Opus. And I couldn't help contrasting the two, and we'll talk about Opus
Once I see it,
once you've
yeah.
seen it as well. But there's I think Opus suffered a little from that because Restless was so tight and so kind of self-contained that when I saw Opus, which is also a kind of a stressful film in a bunch of ways, I was thinking, well, this feels like a holiday because I just saw Restless. I was incredibly stressed the whole time, and this felt like a pleasant vacation in comparison. Had I not seen Restless the day before, I think I might have felt a little bit differently about Opus in some respects.
I think as a final thought, it seems like, and I'll have more when to say to you privately, not on the podcast because we're recording it now, about this film. But it's like this is what I think some people are really looking for, maybe
In Restless,
in
yeah.
Hollywood. Sorry, like a story that's like tense and contained.
Yeah.
You know, like it's streamlined, and that's not necessarily bad or good, but you know, clearly works.
Yeah, it's definitely something that as I'm writing scripts just now, there's a couple of them
That's
that
what I'm
are
saying.
there's a couple of them at one particular one that's taking place mostly in one location, and finding ways to plausibly escalate the tension and the consequences from any action that your character takes is tricky to manage. So when I see it done and done well, like absolute applause for that. It's really, really good. Well done to Jed Hart because I really enjoyed this film.